I'll begin with the end. So right now I'm working as an applied sports psychologist with Manchester City. I'm doing 4 days a week there with the first team, which I've been doing for just coming up to a year now. And I still continue to work with just with the senior men's team now with the England cricket. So prior to this role, I was employed full time by the England and Wales Cricket Board. So that's where I'm at now. So this kind of started sort of 15, 16, 17. I was representing England juniors at cricket at that time, and my sole aspiration pretty much was to play professional cricket. Yeah. And got through my A levels and somehow managed to combine doing my A levels with playing lots of cricket, and my focus was fully on my cricket rather than the A levels at the time. But by the time I got to the end of my A levels, I still hadn't broken into a first class county. I'd played some second team cricket. Yeah. Then went to Durham University. Was really lucky to go there, and genuinely lucky because my A levels alone probably weren't good enough. But the fact that I was a half decent cricketer helped me get in there, I think. Yeah. But studied my degree at Durham Uni. Did a degree in sports science. Had a fantastic time there. Made friends that are now my best friends for life, and captained the cricket team. But the main reason I went there actually was it was the first cricket centre of excellence from the universities at the time, which was the NC funded one. But by the end of those 3 years, I really felt like I'd given it the best possible shot I could in professional cricket, but I probably realised I wasn't quite going to be good enough. I took a job down in London then, worked in marketing for 3 years, and that was a really pivotal moment for me because I was slogging it out in London like all my mates were, having a great time at weekends, but probably realised I didn't want to be doing this for the rest of my life. Yeah. And at that stage, the natural thing to do was go up the career ladder in marketing, which I was doing down in London. But I made a decision at the time to do something completely different, and I did want it to be an adventure, but also to give me some skills that I might use in later life. I wasn't exactly sure how I'd use them, so I wanted to learn another language. So I went to Spain at the time, taught English, and over the course of about 18 months in Madrid, I learned Spanish. Right. Met my now wife, which definitely wasn't part of the plan, but that's what happened. And then a job came up in Gibraltar and developing cricket in Gibraltar. And with my background in cricket, still my love for cricket, which has always been there, and my increasing love for Spain as well. That seemed to be the perfect fit. And so I got the job sort of in my mid to late 20s now, 26, 27 in Gibraltar, developing cricket. Still no psychology at this stage. Yeah. But those 3 years developing cricket in Gibraltar was looking back again, as we always do, like a hugely important period for me because I was working day in, day out with in schools, with teachers, with kids, and also with people who, the standard of cricket, as you can imagine in Gibraltar, is probably not elite, but the people that represent their country take it, really seriously, and that concept of you can have a high performance mindset without being an elite performer was really what came to me there, and that's what we tried to do over those 3 years. I then, on the back of that, sort of got the opportunity to go back and work, to go and work for the England and Wales Cricket Board. So I'm now sort of 28, 29. Yeah. And that was the period where I got a job with the ECB working, it was regional performance manager was the title of the job. And I was, in essence, the job was going around the first class counties, helping them share best practice in developing young cricketers, in developing the academies. And that was the moment where I began to see there's some really good fitness stuff out there. The technical and tactical coaching is outstanding. Yeah. But I felt the bit that interested me most was the psychology. And actually there was a lack of support in that area, or even a lack of knowledge around how we can support people in that area. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky enough to be funded at that stage to do a master's by the ECB in sports psychology, and that's where I really began my interest. And looking back, it was always the way people think, the way people learn, people's beliefs, behaviours was always a bit that interested me most. Yeah. And it kind of became obvious to me then. I did the master's, began working as an applied psych in England junior programs. And then went away from cricket and began working in football. I worked for a number of years with Wolverhampton Wanderers. Yeah. During all this time, I was having to study a fair bit as well, because obviously I'm going through the process that most people go through when they finish university in psychology to become a chartered psychologist. And then, I worked in some Olympic sports as well during this process. It was pretty full on. I was getting trains everywhere so I could get all my studies done on the trains. And then by, I suppose, about 35, by the time I became a fully fledged chartered sports psychologist. And at that stage, I was then contacted by England Wales Cricket Board and asked to apply for the job as national lead, which at the time I said very clearly I wouldn't be able to do because it involves a lot of winter touring, and by this stage we had the first of our two children.
Yeah.
They agreed to put it in my contract that I would only be away from the family for 2 weeks maximum, and for me that was kind of the non-negotiable. Once I knew that was going to be possible, I took the job there, and it was an amazing 4 years in the run into the World Cup.
Yeah.
Which was obviously the summer before last. Anyone that follows cricket will have remembered that, and we'll probably chat a bit more about that later. But I mean, to have been privileged enough to be part of a group of cricketers that not only were at the kind of top of their game, they took cricket forward over that 4 year period. They changed the way on their cricket was played, and then to finish with the World Cup win was just unbelievable, really. And then since then I'm still keeping a day a week working with the cricketers, and now I've gone in working with the first team at Manchester City. So looking back now, that period of learning Spanish, etc., and obviously we've got a number of Spanish-speaking staff. Yeah. All of that is now. I didn't know it at the time, but it's kind of useful now.
Yeah, going off tangent. When you work at Manchester City, are you talking in Spanish with the coaching staff, or is it more you go down through the English route?
Yeah, a mixture. So it's definitely helped. Some of the players as well. So being able to converse in someone's native language is definitely different.
Yeah, I guess you get that connection more, and you can get your point across more there and more direct.
Yeah. And I also think the fact that they see that you've shown an interest in their culture. It was a challenge, and it's easy. The easy thing with me to kind of look back now and say, as a 16-year-old, I was super diligent, I was super professional, but it definitely wasn't the case. I at that stage, it was very much, and I'm mindful of what parents might think of some of it, but I'm just speaking openly honestly about my experience. Yeah. And it was very much the case, certainly during my A-levels. I was dead set on being a professional cricketer, and if it was a choice between setting aside 2 hours on Saturday morning to revise or going in the net, I'd be doing an hour and a half in the net and half an hour's revision. But what was really interesting for me actually was when I went back in my sort of late 20s and studied again and did a master's, and it just showed me just how possible it is to combine your time and still have lots of spare time actually. So I was doing a full-time master's, working full-time. Yeah. And the times actually doing my A-levels and a degree as well where I was able to do it, it's just making sure that the bit where I was actually dedicated to the study or to nailing an assignment or to doing some sort of revision, you actually focused on that. You don't have to spend hours doing it, I found if the time when you're actually doing it, you're present and you're genuinely there, then you can get a lot more done than probably you realise actually. That's a good question. So it would involve a number of areas, and it's largely determined by what the team or the organisation you're working with demands. So I'll work from one-to-one work with players or athletes. So I do a number of performance-related one-to-one work with players and athletes. So helping them on the pitch get into the right emotional state, helping them recover from setback on the pitch, help them consider the sorts of decisions they make and whether they're always the most effective ones. I'll do well-being work with players and staff as well. So that's broader, we know that the prevalence of mental illness is just as high in sport, in fact, possibly higher than the general population. So I'll work in collaboration with clinical psychologists on that as well. I'll do a lot of work around the system around players. So very often, traditionally, people would say, get the psychologist in to work one-to-one with an athlete. But once you put the athlete back in the environment with coaches, support staff, the very things that triggered the perhaps the dysfunctional behaviour in the environment are back again. So it's not much use working just with the player. I'll often work with all the support staff around a player or an athlete as well, help them understand how to get the best out of the athlete. And then finally, I'll work a lot with with the coaches too, just in helping them understand what makes each individual player tick, how to get the best out of them, how to best communicate, and that's very much different. So with the England cricket team, I did a lot of work with the whole group around the culture of the group, and over a 4-year period. With the football at the moment, I'm doing a lot more work with the players and with the coaches more individually.
Right. Okay.
But that's very much down. It's kind of the demands of that group that you're with.
Yeah.
Is there like an overarching challenge in terms of mental health that sports professionals particularly face? Is there like a niche mental health challenge in that area?
Yeah, I think there is. What it stems from is that sport, and I'm still not sure whether sport draws a certain type of person or sport creates a certain type of person, and that's definitely up for debate. But there's definitely still in elite men's sport, which is where I spend the majority of my time working, at least, a definite feeling that you don't show your emotions too much, because if you do, you're showing a level of vulnerability, you're giving a little bit of yourself away, and we know, you don't need to be a clinical psych to know that if you're just suppressing emotion day in, day out, and that there's all this stuff in the environment, the scrutiny, the expectation, daily performances, dictating your career. Then if you're suppressing these feelings and keeping them to yourself, then that's going to lead to levels of anxiety, low mood, these sorts of things. So it might manifest itself in different ways, but the root cause of it, I would say, of course, not in all cases, but relative to the general population, there's the definite narrative that people need to just keep any negative feelings to themselves in particular, and there's obviously problems associated with that.
Yeah.
And is that sort of linked as well to, I mean, I don't know if this is right, but that sort of very clear line of you either won or you lost. Like there isn't sort of, there's no middle ground. Either you succeeded or you didn't.
There is, yeah. And that's why, you're absolutely right, and that's why the best, I mean, talking about the people I'm most fortunate to work with now actually tend to be beyond that, because if any sportsman or any person actually are judging their performance on just an outcome, a success, a failure, doing really well in an exam, passing or failing an exam, scoring 100 or getting a dud, winning or losing, these sorts of things, it's inevitably going to be an emotional roller coaster, because clearly that's not within your control. And from a psychological perspective, if you're judging your performance, or in some cases yourself, based on an outcome, especially if it's a win or a loss, then you're in very dangerous ground. And what the most of the top performers, they're very good at, of course, they have the emotions associated with winning and losing, but they're very good at knowing what they judge their performance on.
Yeah.
And they're generally things that are well within their control.
Yeah.
And in the end, you don't win everything, but the elite performers are able to come back day in, day out, because they're not distracted as much by the outcome, by the result.
I always say control the controllables.
Yeah. It is, and controlling controllables on match day, but in a broader sense, just the way, without getting too deep in a half hour, kind of the way that people judge their lives, have you got, do you know really what's important to you and what you're going to judge yourself on?
Yeah.
So that then, and are those things within your control?
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, a really good question. I can definitely start off by saying what culture isn't, and it's not definitely not a list of words that we stick on a wall, which tends to be, even at the top level of sport, the kind of the what people deem culture to be.
Yeah.
That's not to say that sticking words on a wall is not also really important. But for me, culture is, in its simplest sense, is a collection of values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviours. So that a group adopt and deem to be, the way the simple thing. When we did a lot of work around culture with the England cricket team, and the way that they phrased it in the end was just, how do we do things around here?
Yeah.
And it's very clear, and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable in the environment. And I think every group's different. So moving on to your second part of the question about what's important. I mean, every team, every group of people will naturally adopt their own aspects of culture. And I don't think you can impose a culture on any group. And in fact, I I've made the mistake of trying to do that earlier on in my career, but certainly with the England cricket team, the culture came from within. But there are definitely, if you're going to be part of a team, certain aspects of the culture hold true. So, for example, if you say part of our culture is everyone puts their own individual needs first, then clearly that team's not going to function for very long.
Yeah.
So there has to be something, I think, in any successful team culture around genuinely enjoying the success of the team over your own individual, opportunities for glory.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely got to be something about that. Yeah. If we're talking about sport, there has to be something about sort of elite behaviours within a culture. I think you can't have a culture in elite sport that's not sort of around professional behaviours, approach to practice, that sort of stuff. Then I certainly haven't come across an elite team that doesn't have that as an important part. So a high performance mindset would be for me. So the key. There's two aspects to it. I think. One is having those behaviours and approaches to practice, to preparation that we associate with people that are generally significantly above the norm. But then the second part to it, and this is the bit that often gets overlooked, is doing it consistently for a sustained period of time. I know that sounds obvious. If anyone's played sport or a musical instrument to a reasonable standard or mastered any skill, we'll all know that there are certain days when the dice fall in our favour and everything's great and we think, we really are at the top of our game today.
Yeah.
But the high performance mindset is a willingness to adopt the behaviours even when things aren't in your favour, even when you don't feel at your best, and doing that consistently for a sustained period of time.
Yeah. And again, that links in again for me as well. What you hit home there is control the controllable. So that mindset is in your control. Do you say? Okay, so that's a really interesting question. So the mindset potentially. So, but you still can't get away from the fact that some days you'll wake up and you'll be a bit of a grumpy mood, and you don't feel great. So actually, what it comes down to ultimately is behaviours. Yeah. And so, and the thing that stuns me about some of these elite performers that I work with is they're able to turn up and you think this guy's nowhere today. You can see that. But as soon as they walk over the line, the behaviours that they display are still elite. Yeah. And you can always choose behaviour. Yeah. You can't choose necessarily how you're going to feel. No. You can't even choose, I don't believe, the thoughts that you're having, because those thoughts will naturally come and go. But you can choose the acts, the decisions you make and the behaviours that you choose to adopt. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Again, I think that's a
that's really the nub of a lot of the work that I do. And
yeah,
I think very often initially as a sports psych, I was brought in during the lows, and you're kind of trying to almost paper over the cracks and boost people's confidence and you know, do the, without putting a downer on it, the kind of all the positive psychology, you know, we can do this type of stuff, which for me actually is it's not part of my philosophy as a psychologist. I believe you do all the preparation for the lows before it happens, so that by the time you do have an inevitable step back in anything, then you've already created a mindset of first of all, what we've already talked a lot about. So what am I actually judging my low on? Is it because I'm just in a bad run of form? Or have I got controllable approaches, beliefs, attitudes that I can judge myself on? But also really deeply thinking about how and this is a massive one for me, how you look for opportunity in any scenario. And one of the, I was thinking about this actually when you sent me the questions that we're having a look at here. One of the things that I think sets real top performers apart from anyone else is that they just look for the opportunity in any scenario, and they really believe that opportunity can happen. So you know, they might be losing 5-0 with 20 minutes left, and there'll be one or two top players that will still see an opportunity. They'll still think, well, okay, even if we lose, we can do this, or maybe seeing an opportunity in a perceived setback or failure is really one of the things that I believe sets the top performers apart. And you can definitely learn that. You can definitely learn to do that.
Yeah, and again, that links into that culture. I think looking at Liverpool, we thought their monster mindset or monster mentality, where they always thought they were going to get the winner, even if it was the 90th minute. But yeah, I can hit home about that. Yeah.
So I'll tell you a little. I'm conscious of time here, but this is a really relevant story, I think, and it was published a fair bit in the press at the time. So I'm not breaching any confidentialities here. Like one of the within the cricket team in those 4 years into the World Cup, one of our core values that around our culture was courage. It was showing, it was, and their definition of courage was taking positive decisions on the pitch, even when they knew there was going to be they were probably going to get pillared for it and be deemed as reckless if it didn't come off. And I don't know if you remember, but like going into the World Cup, we were world number one. We'd broken the highest score, I think, 3 times in a 50 over game. But 3 or 4 games into the World Cup, we started losing some of the at least what looked like the confidence. And I can remember we played Australia at Lord's, and you could just see in the dressing room there was a different feeling. And you could see they didn't feel as bulletproof as they had done previously, and we got beaten quite comfortably at Lord's by Australia, and at that stage then we were in a position where we had to, even to qualify for the semi-final, and having gone in as world number one and clear favourites and 4 years preparation, we were at a stage now we had to play India, who were probably playing some of the best cricket in the tournament, and New Zealand, who were number one at that stage in the group stages, in the next 2 games, and if we didn't win both of those games, we were out of the tournament. And I remember clearly that this is where defining your values and your culture is so important, because the fact that the lads had defined courage and as part of their culture was such an important thing, because we were able to fall back. And I remember being in a meeting with the players and discussing really what courage means, and actually this potentially being the first chance for us as a group to display courage, because actually we'd just been smashing everyone for 4 years, and now the lads were actually a bit worried, a bit nervous. And you're on the verge of basically seen as yet again another England cricket team that choked when it really mattered. So they had this meeting, they talked a lot about what courage meant to them, and having that to fall back on sort of gave them so much confidence. So they went out and played India, and they said, whether we win or lose, we're going to display what we talked about. We're going to display courage. We're going to take positive options from ball one. And Johnny and Jason, you might remember that they went out and did exactly that, and we smashed them. And then from then on, and then had the same performance against Australia in the next game. New Zealand, and then the semi-final against Australia. Going back to sort of why I sort of went down that tangent, it was really to illustrate the fact that during a perceived low, we were at a low there, and we were on the verge of being knocked out of the World Cup. We had a framework to fall back on and say, whatever happens, we can display courage, we can display unity, which was another one of ours. And we what that meant, and they genuinely, without defining that, I think they wouldn't have had that to fall back on.
No.
It was, I still feel, and we talk about decisions, I mean, taking that job with England cricket was, looking back, probably one of the best career decisions I've ever made. And the fact that I love cricket, I love psychology, and I'm working with guys who are just not only a great bunch of lads, but are regularly taking the game to a new level. It was just an amazing experience and an exhilarating experience to be part of. I think I've reflected it a lot actually since about, the final we were lucky, so it could have gone either way. Clearly, it went to Super Over and anyone could have won that. But take that away, and the cricket they played in the 4 years up to that, I think the key things for me were right from the start. They built their individual plans and the team game plans around strengths.
Yeah.
So up until then, I think typically England cricket at least has spent a lot of time thinking about how the opposition were going to try and take advantage of us and trying to negate our vulnerabilities. But they went in and said, we're going to play to our strengths. Mm-hmm. So they picked 6 really attacking batsmen and said, sometimes we're going to have a car crash, but we're going to keep playing to our strengths. They picked certain types of bowlers that would be aggressive. So the whole game plan and the whole ethos of the approach was strengths-based.
Yeah.
And they practiced their strengths, which gets overlooked a lot. Yeah. People spend a lot of time practicing their weaknesses, but they spend more time practicing their strengths. I think the second point is the one I've just said. Fairly early on, we clearly defined kind of our culture, and by culture it's on the pitch as well. So we had that framework, and they regularly used that in reviews. Yeah. And there were a couple of times where we did lose badly, but they were very strict about not reviewing the performance necessarily, but reviewing that framework.
Yeah.
And then the last one was, and this is easier said than done, but by the end there was a genuine, like, every single individual in that group just wanted us to win the World Cup, and there was really more than any opportunity for individual glory, and it's very rare now. And you saw a number of times players sacrificing their own individual goals for the good of the team, knowing that they weren't going to get public praise for it.
Yeah.
But the fact that they were getting so much praise for that in the dressing room, and and the types of people that we had there. So yeah, I think there'd be 10 things I could go through, but I reckon those would be the 3. Working on developing your strengths and basing your game plan around it, having a framework of controllable attitudes and values that you can fall back on, and that's genuine, and this is more intangible, but that genuine willingness to sacrifice your individual goals for the team.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say necessarily that these are behaviours, right?
Yeah.
They're a combination of behaviour and attitudes. So I think one would be, and I'm basing this largely on my experiences in sport, a genuine passion for and love of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And again, without going too deep, I do think there's perhaps sometimes a pressure on people to find the thing they're passionate about, which is not helpful either. But I would say that the people that have the real elite performers, they're doing it. You can see they love it.
Yeah.
If you watched England football last night, you would have seen Phil Foden come off the last 20 minutes. When he's got a football on his foot, he just absolutely loves it. And I honestly think with Phil, he could be playing anywhere. He just loves playing football. And they're all, the irony is the higher up you get, the more distractions there are, but they still keep the essence of actually just loving what they do.
Yeah.
I think and being able to adapt, I think, and willing to adapt.
Yeah.
So there are lots of kind of fairly good performers who perform in a certain scenario, but the best ones are able and willing to adapt to whatever life throws at them, and on and off the pitch. And I'd say the third one would be kind of a realism, so a genuine honesty about where you're at now and what your strengths are and what you need to improve on.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get it wrong because they overestimate their weaknesses. Mm-hmm. But then a lot of people get it wrong because they underestimate their weaknesses and overestimate their strengths. Whereas actually the elite performers, they'll really know where they are.
Yeah.
And where they need to improve and how they can get there. They don't fit themselves either way.
Yeah.
Again, there'd be a lot more, but I think there'd probably be, you get all sorts of people that succeed. But I'd say those things are pretty common across all of them.
Okay.
Oh,
goodness me. So yeah, I think we've referred probably to most of them. I think definitely, and I'll definitely preface this by saying I'm speaking from my own experience here as opposed to preaching. So I can tell you from what's worked for me and certainly what hasn't worked for me is that first one would be, I believe, don't close doors. So you'll never know what life is going to throw you. So if you decided now, I know what I want to study at uni, I know what I want to do after uni, I know what I want to do, then I believe you're on slightly, I believe that's a dangerous place because first of all, you might get halfway down that route and realise this isn't fulfilling actually. And then you feel like a failure if you don't do it. And secondly, if you're so single-minded, then you miss out on opportunities that life will completely unexpected opportunities that life will throw at you. So I think, of course, have your values. You're going to have to work hard, but work hard shouldn't feel draining. Working hard should also feel fulfilling. But I believe don't pigeonhole yourself too early in what you want to do, and be ready to change, and don't be scared of changing as well. That's my. I think the second one would be. This sounds a bit corny, but I don't see it enough. Is genuinely respect everyone that you come into contact with. So people talk about our manager at Manchester City now, Pep Guardiola, as being a master tactician, which he is, possibly the most successful manager, potentially, or certainly in the current climate of the game, which he is. But the thing that struck me most about him, and this does sound corny, but it's really genuine, is you really feel like he shows the same level of respect to Sergio Aguero, to someone that's to me, or someone that's working in the kitchen. That you genuinely get that, and over a period of time, and that people realise that, and it, I think for me that would be a non-negotiable. It should be something that everyone aspires to do.
Yeah, for me that's just like basic manners, isn't it? And just saying please and thank you, and saying hello, and just being. So there's the basic manners, but there's also the genuine belief that actually you can learn off everyone. You really can, and be ready for that. And then the last one I would say is we've talked a lot about this today, but is really think about how you judge yourself and what you judge yourself on, and if those things are, because what you judge yourself on. Well, first of all, if you don't know what it is, you will allow other people to influence that. So if we're not very clear on how we judge ourselves, we'll begin to judge ourselves on what we think others think of us. And then secondly is make sure those things are things that you can, going back to again, you can genuinely influence and control. So if you judge yourself on getting a first at university or becoming a doctor, that's not actually totally within your control. But if you judge yourself on, making sure that I make courageous decisions, making sure that I show respect to people, making sure that when I get the time aside, I do actually genuinely focused on what I'm doing. Those sorts of things, they're the sorts of things that I think I would encourage people to really judge those, because, and this is cliche, and I know you do a lot of work with the kids on this, but I think there is, if you don't have a framework that you judge yourself on, there's so many other people out there that do want to judge you, and we're prone to that. I'm very fortunate to come from a very secure family base, and both of my parents would be definitely numbers 1 and 2 on that list. 90% of that influence is good, I'd say. And the 10% that I tell them every day is no, genuinely. They were, as I said, I was very fortunate to, both of them would come throwing me around, getting interested in the things I was interested in. I never felt they were trying to lead me to be interested in the things they were interested in or wanted me to do. I think there was a chap who was a cricket coach. His name's Gordon Lord, who was a really important mentor for me. And I think that's something we haven't spoken about today. But having people that you feel that are good role models for you is an important thing as well. And again, a lot of values that he displayed. He was the coach of the England under-15s cricket team, and I'm still friends with him now. And then there was a chap who was actually, neither of them know this, but I can remember the moment I decided I wanted to study psychology. I was in a an England cricket meeting, and there were two psychologists in the room, quite senior psychologists, having a debate about how we handle the press. And I remember coming away thinking, right, that was the most fascinating conversation I've ever heard. I'm going to, and literally I enrolled just masters in psychology the week after that.